Okay. Okay, we made it. We're on verse 10 of chapter 14, I believe it is, or maybe 13. Hold on.
Rabbi, can you make it a little bigger?
I can give that a shot. 13:10. Let me see if I can make that a little bigger. I believe I did that last week. How's that? Okay.
Perfect.
Yes, that's nice and big. Good for all of our eyes. Okay. Wasn't sure whether I heard the door. Yeah, and did anyone else hear it? I thought I heard a little bit of a ring. I know Rick's usually here. I don't know whether
She's very controlled.
you know. Okay, so let's do our blessing for Torah study. Last words. La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Which means that we praise God, who has given us the commandment of studying Torah, of engaging in words of our tradition. So we sort of left our journey here sort of with a little family dysfunction. Lot and Abraham are sort of arguing with each other. Really better said, their shepherds are arguing with each other. Nice, okay. And because of all this conflict, they decide, you know what? We're just going to split up. You can take your shepherds one way. I'll take my shepherds the other way. Middle East is big enough for the two of us. Let's get going and not have any problems with that. And so that's sort of where we left off. And so we're going to start on 13:10. Tyler, you feel like reading today?
Certainly. 13:10. 11:10. Lot looked about him and saw how well watered was the whole plain of the Jordan, all of it. This was before the Lord had destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, all the way to Zoar, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt. So Lot chose for himself the whole plain of Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Thus they parted from each other. Abram remained in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled in the cities of the plain, pitching his tents near Sodom. Now the inhabitants of Sodom were very wicked sinners against the law.
Foreshadowing, because we're not going to get into that story just yet. It's a little foreshadowing for us. So they split up. Lot goes one way, Abraham goes the other way, and Lot's, around Sodom. And as we're going to find out a little later, being around Sodom really isn't the best place to be. There's going to be some trouble in River City. And so they're going to have that coming up a little bit later, perhaps even later today, depending on our speed. So let's keep going. Melissa, you want to pick up?
And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had parted from him, raise your eyes and look out from where you are, to the north and south, to the east and west. For I give all the land that you see to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, then your offspring too can be counted. Up, walk about the land through its length and its breadth. For I give it to you. And Abram moved his tent and came to dwell at the terebinths of Mamre, which are in Hebron. And he built an altar there to the Lord.
Okay, we're going to pause right there. A very important paragraph for a number of reasons. Not, for the short of it, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict has some of its roots in these chapters, right? We talk about religious Zionism, right? The idea that the Jews are entitled, because God promised them this land, to have dominion over that entire area. You have this verse, God says to Avram, right, look where you are and go north, south, east, west, spread all over the place. Ufaratza, spread everywhere, right? And that's all your land. And where does Abraham end up? Hebron, which is where? Depends on who you ask.
That's true, that's true.
Yes, indeed, in quote unquote greater Israel, that is where Hebron is. It's in the West Bank. And so, depending on who you ask, is where it is. So, but that's where he's hanging out. And that's going to be an important factor as we continue, especially when it gets to the death of Abraham and Sarah, because where are they buried? According to tradition, Hebron. They're buried in Machpelah, which is in Hebron, right? And so if you actually went to Israel today and you had a little bit of adventure in your spirit and you crossed the green line and went into the territories, that's where you could visit, the graves of Abraham and Sarah. Not that they're buried there, but it's maybe if you believe hard enough, maybe they're buried there. But I would guess that probably not. Would this be my guess? Not to be a spoil sport, but I'm guessing probably not. It's like when somebody finds a piece of wood from Noah's Ark. I found it. It's Noah's Ark. It's a piece of wood. Calm down. It's okay. It'll be all right. And that's coming from someone who, by the way, loves that stuff. I don't believe in any of it, but I love it. Whether I want to or not to believe in it. I think it's fantastic that people have that kind of faith. Like we do okay with it. The Catholics are the kings of this because they're the ones who have the reliquaries. The little pieces of bones from the saints. And so if you go to like Italy, and especially Italy, but Spain and other places in the churches, you'll have these boxes or you'll have these vials that are supposed to have, the blood of Jesus or a bone of John the Baptist or, whatever, or a piece of the true cross from the crucifixion. And they believe it's really the case. And so they have it always in a bejeweled box, behind something, not for nothing. I'm pretty sure John the Baptist didn't have 12 thumbs because, any church you can go into, you can find the thumb of John the Baptist. So much in the same way, Machpelah, it's a nice story. If they knew exactly where it was, if Abraham and Sarah are buried there, it's like, I apologize, but I'm guessing not. I'm guessing we have absolutely no idea where Abraham and Sarah were buried in terms of what today is. But, let's just fight over something. Okay, now chapter 14 is a run on names. And I'm going to spare poor Renee this torturous little paragraph here because we have just a lot of names here because we're going to have a battle. We're going to have a little fighting. And so you have King Amraphel of Shinar and King Arioch of Elasar and King Chedorlaomer, sure, why not, of Elam. It sounds like a cheese. Okay, and so they're all fighting each other. They're going to fight against Sodom and Gomorrah. All these people fighting each other and killing each other. And this just keeps going for a while. And why this is eventually important, not that it's really important at all, why it's eventually important is that Lot, somewhere down here, gets captured. And so that's not great. So we see all this thing. The invaders seized all the wealth of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions, went on their way. And they took Lot, a son of Avram's brother, and all his possessions and departed. And so now we have the rescue, basically. So Avram musters his forces and goes in and saves the day. Huzzah for Avram. He gets to have his victorious gladiator-like moment, and he wins, and everything is happy. And he gets some extra money out of the deal, which is never a bad idea. So let's go to chapter 15, because that was not going to be so helpful for us to read that all the way through. Sometimes it's good to summarize. 15, Renee.
Sometime later, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. He said, "Fear not, Abram, I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great." But Abram said, "O Lord God, what can you give me, seeing that I shall die childless, and the one in charge of my household as Damascus Eliezer.
Yeah, see, we weren't going to get away with no hard
I
names.
know. Abram said further, since you have granted me no offspring, my steward will be my heir.
Okay, so go ahead. We got a problem here unfolding, right? That all this nice talk, this wonderful, sweet talks, these little whispers into Abraham's ear about how all of his descendants are going to be as numerous as the stars in the sky and the dust on the earth and the fish in the sea. That's not really there. I made that one up. But it's going to be just tremendously great. And meanwhile, he's got no kids. So that's slightly a problem. You know, how can he have all these descendants that number the stars of the sky if he has no children? And he's saying, look, I'm an old guy already, you know, and the one I have here is my servant, basically, Eliezer. He's going to be the one to inherit everything. Lucky him. You know, he gets to have everything because he's the chief. He's the steward of his house. And that's where it's going to go. And so that's what Avram is saying. By the way, that line over early on in that paragraph, I think it's probably verse 1 or 2. Fear not, Avram, I am a shield to you. Magain Avraham, right? Where they have in the Amidah, that's where it's from. That God is Abraham's shield. And so God's a source of protection. And Abraham's, yeah, that's all well and good. Meanwhile, my family tree is withering. So that's not so great. So, Marilyn, you want to pick up there? Okay.
Go back.
Are they cheers?
That's fair.
My other list.
Okay, Sharon, you want to pick up the word of the eternal? You got to unmute though. There you go.
Okay,
You have the power.
thank you. The word of the eternal came to him in reply, that one shall not be your heir, none but your very own issue shall be your heir. God took him outside and said, look toward heaven and count the stars if you are able to count them. And God added, so shall your offspring be. And because he put his trust in the eternal, God reckoned it to his merit.
Okay, so basically, once again, the same sort of story. Oh, don't worry, you're gonna have all these kids, Mazel Tov all around, Manischewitz and schnapps for everybody. And Avram's waiting there, going, okay, make with the kids, if this is gonna be a thing, But Abraham doesn't complain so much. Abraham sort of has faith, and because he has faith in God, God reckons it to his merit, which is saying, yeah, Abraham's a good guy. It'll work out. It'll be all right. At this point, spoiler alert, it'll be okay. But a couple of little bumps along the road. Here, Sharon, give us paragraph 2.
Okay. Then God said to him, I am the eternal who brought you out from Ur of the Chaldeans to assign this land to you as a possession. And he said, O eternal God, how shall I know that I am to possess it?
Yeah, we got to have a little, give me a little clue here. Give me something that's going on. Sandy, you want to pick up next as I scroll? But let me scroll. Okay, here we go. Scrolled.
God answered, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old she-goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young bird.
Lunchtime.
Oh. Ooh. He brought God all these and cut them. Ew. He brought God all these and cut them in two, placing each half opposite the other. But he did not cut up the birds. Birds of prey came down upon the carcasses, and Abram drove them away.
Don't you hate when you're planning a picnic when the bugs get on your food? It's sort of the same thing. These vultures are coming down. And, it's a big piece of cow. It's a 3-year-old heifer he's sliced into half. He had a pretty good blade. 3-year-old she-goat and ram. These are not easy things to cut, Didn't cut up the birds, though. Because, you need a nice whole chicken sometimes. Again, it's, when you roast a chicken, you cook it whole sometimes, right? Sometimes you get the pieces. And so he's cutting it out. By the way, as a side note, in Leviticus, the verb actually escapes me, but there is a specific verb that is meant to pinch the head off a dove. That way you can, sacrifice it correctly. It's not a verb we use often, which is why I don't remember it. because it doesn't come up in common conversation. Yeah, just sort of like click, and that way, like you can just spread the blood everywhere. We'll get there in a few months. We're not there yet. We got a little time for Leviticus. We got a long ways to go. So again, the ants come to try to steal his picnic basket, and Abraham drives them away. Give me a little more, Sandy.
As the sun was about to set, a deep sleep fell upon Abram, and a great dark dread descended upon him. And God said to Abram, "Know well that your offspring will be strangers in a land not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. As for you, you shall go to your fathers in peace. You shall be buried at a ripe old age, and they shall return here in the 4th generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete."
Okay, and so that's a lot there. That's foreshadowing. If we're going to take the view of the authors of the Bible, this happened afterwards. They're writing all this stuff down. They said, let's give Abraham a little premonition. Let him know that this is going to be terrible for a while, because that's what's going to happen in our history. So let's say Abraham had a little bit of a heads up. He got a little bit of the inside scoop. But eventually they will come back, and then the people are going to be punished eventually, but not quite yet. Not quite yet. I'm going to smack around the Amorites. They don't even exist yet, I think. Okay. Abraham is still sort of dreaming away here. Marilyn, you want to pick up there? Sorry, Marilyn Warner. Over here. Yeah.
When the sun set and it was very dark, there appeared a smoking oven and a flaming torch which passed between those pieces. On that day, the Eternal made a covenant with Abram, saying, "To your offspring I assign this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the Kenites, the Kenetzes, the
You can skip all these names.
Okay, thank you.
All the way down to the Jebusites. So we just keep going on that thing. If all these ites, that are going to be here and they're going to cause problems later. And so I'm going to skip all these ites to the Jebusites. And then we're at chapter 16 in the very beginning of 16. So Marilyn, you want to pick up there?
Sure.
Sarai.
Abram's wife had borne him no children. She had an Egyptian maidservant whose name was Hagar.
No, the good stuff.
Said to Abram, "Look, the Eternal has kept me from bearing. Consort with my maid. Perhaps I shall have a son through her." And Abram heeded Sarah's request. So Sarah, Abram's wife, took her maid, Hagar the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt in the land of Canaan 10 years, and gave her to her husband Abram as a concubine. He cohabitated with Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was lowered in her esteem.
Okay, we're going to pause right there. Welcome to The Handmaid's Tale. Okay. It's on Hulu. I've only watched the first episode because I can't get through that kind of show. Okay, but nonetheless, here we are. So, no children. So, when there's a will, there's a way. You have to sometimes, bend the rules a bit. And so let's, again, be clear whose idea this was. Sarah's idea here to do this, right? I don't think Abraham had much of an objection, but, it seems to be her idea. Consort is a nice PG word here with the maid, and we're going to have a kid. And so Abraham heeded the request, and he certainly did. And then they had a baby very quickly, or here she conceived, actually. So we got a problem, though. Now Hagar is pregnant, and we have this little tension point, that her mistress was lowered in her esteem, basically meaning that she looked at Sarah in a different way, so you can guess that there might have been some ill feelings.
Wasn't it Sarah who planned it?
Yeah, Sarah who planned this whole thing. Now that it unfortunately worked too well. I mean, again, this was the plan, right? And now she's pregnant, and Hagar. Perhaps it can be read that Hagar has her nose in the air a little bit, and basically saying, hey, I was with your man and now I'm pregnant, and you were married to him for forever and you couldn't get pregnant, and so maybe she's feeling a sense of haughtiness, and maybe that she's better than Sarah. And that's not going to go well in the household. That kind of thing is not going to be a pleasant experience for anybody. So it's not exactly a mazel tov moment, I'll put it that way. Just because, again, it's going to cause a little bit more tension in the Abraham household. It's not going to be a great day. So, Bonnie, you want to pick up there? And Sarai said to Abraham,
Said to Abram, the wrong done to me is your fault. I myself put my maid in your bosom. Now that she sees that she is pregnant, I am lowered in her esteem. The Eternal decide between you and me. Abram said to Sarai, your maid is in your hands. Deal with her as you think right. Then Sarah treated her harshly and she ran away from her.
Yeah, none of this gets pleasant. This is certainly, and I think about this only, because not only for this story, but honestly, how sometimes we have these things happening still today. So we have here Sarai being upset. This is all your fault, said Abraham. And what did I do? You know what you did. And so, she's admitting that she did it, instead of putting the maid there. But it's, maybe the offer wasn't as genuine as Avram expected. Maybe he was a little bit over enthusiastic to complete this agreement, whatever it might be. But Sarai is not amused. Who would have thought that engaging the services of a concubine might end messily? But it did. And so Abraham has no idea what he's going to do. God, is invoked here, but God's going to play with it just yet. This idea of the Eternal decide between you and me is basically saying, God, you have to show us who's right here. And Avram is not getting into this at all. Happy wife, happy life. Do with her whatever you want. The maid is in your hands. Whatever you want. I'm out of it. I'm going to go watch TV. Like he's going to go into the man cave, and he's going to let Sarah handle this from here. He's done his job. Okay, so now, it's the next part of this. Now, of course, Sarah is not being pleasant to Hagar. So Hagar says, I'm getting out of here. I'm getting out of this mess. This Jerry Springer drama. I'm getting out of that. She wasn't even on it anymore, is it?
I think it is.
I don't know, but whatever. But that ilk of show, we know the reference, right? So now this is turning into a whole soap opera. So Hagar is bailing. Hagar is getting out of Dodge because Sarah owns Dodge. So, okay.
Want me to continue?
Bonnie, you want to give me one more?
An angel of the Eternal found her by a spring of water in the wilderness, the spring on the road to Shur, and said, Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going? And she said, I am running away from my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Eternal said to her, go back to your mistress and submit to her harsh treatment. And the angel of Eternal said to her, I will greatly increase your offspring, and they shall be too many to count.
Yeah, we got that too, and none of that's really great either, And so Hagar's on the lam, she's running away, and then God's like, "Hey, where are you going?" I'm running away, and so the angel says, "You know what? Go back. Go back, and whatever she gives you, just take it with a smile in a way, submit to the treatment." And then, there's going to be a reward for this experience that we're going to have a greatly increased offspring and there'll be too many to count. So Hagar gets her own covenant. She gets her own promise, which that part at least is interesting from a theological, religious perspective, that Abraham gets a covenant, but also Hagar gets a covenant as well, that she gets this, if she goes along with this whole deal, she's going to have an increase in her offspring, in a very amazing, fantastic kind of way. Okay, any questions so far? A little pause for the cause for a second. I know we're sort of blowing through some of this text. Anyone have any questions, comments, thoughts? Okay, we're all here, we're all into it. Linda White, you want to pick up a little bit here?
The angel of the Eternal said to her further, "Behold, you are with child and shall bear a son. You shall call him Ishmael, for the Eternal has paid heed to your suffering. He shall be a wild ass of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell alongside of all his kinsmen."
Not really a great prophecy. Like, you could have better prophecies than him being a wild ass of a man. This sort of this forecasting of the violence that the descendants of Ishmael, in that period might do. So that's what you have here in this moment. We get the, you're going to bear a son. That's nice, right? Ishmael, just call him Ishmael. So that's God hears, right? Shema. You see in Ishmael, you see Shema in the middle. So it's listening, it's hearing, Yishma. So, God will hear. El is theophanic, El is God's name. So, God will listen, God will hear, is Ishmael. And so that's what we'll get that name from. And again, the prophecy could be better. Could be better. But the idea is going to be violence and anger. But he shall dwell alongside everybody as well. So that's something. That ain't chopped liver. Okay. 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 Leah, you want to pick up there? And she called? You got to unmute. You got to unmute first. There you go.
And she called the Eternal who spoke to her. You are Elroy?
El-Roi.
Elroy.
Yes.
By which she meant, have I not gone on seeing after God saw me? Mm-hmm. Therefore, the well was called Bir Lahai Roi.
Easy for you to say.
Yeah. It is between Kadesh and Bered. Hagar bore a son to Abram, and Abram gave the son that Hagar bore him the name Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bore Ishmael to Abram.
86 years old. My goodness. And this was before Viagra. So he's 86 years old. My goodness.
I think Tony Randall did the same thing.
That's right.
Oh, you see?
But he was 82.
82. We won't begrudge him the 4 years. That'll be fine. My goodness.
Tony Randall.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it's hard chasing around kids when you're in your 40s. I can't imagine 86 and a toddler. But I'm guessing Sarai was doing a lot of the work. But that, and Hagar too, let's not forget. They had a whole staff, I guess, to be fair. They had a whole staff. So, but once again, 86, mazel all around. Good times. So we have Ishmael. Now we're fast forwarding. It's his bar mitzvah. We have 13 years later, because Abraham is now 99. So if we're doing the math, Ishmael is 13. But we're not going to get to him just yet. Okay. Leah, you want to give me one more on Avram?
When Abram was 99 years old, the Eternal appeared to Abram and said to him, I am El Shaddai.
There you go.
Walk in my ways and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will make you exceedingly numerous. Abram threw himself on his face, and God spoke to him further. As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations, and you shall no longer be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. And I make you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fertile, even at 99, and make
Yes,
nations of you, and kings shall come forth from you.
exactly. Sounds good. Yeah, God certainly got the fertile part right. So if we go back to the beginning of this, we have God appears to Avram. They've spoken before, not they haven't been introduced, but we have sort of a different name of introduction here, El Shaddai. And so El Shaddai is sort of a newer name of God, at least in this context. It is likely a much older name of God in terms of the history and origins of the name. There's a lot of debate about where we get Shaddai from. There's a mystical interpretation of the shin, the shin on the mezuzah. So if you have a mezuzah, you'll often see the letter shin on it, and that is supposed to stand for Shaddai, which is supposed to be an acronym for Shomer Delatot Israel, the garden of the doors of Israel. So that's a nice midrash of where it comes from. Feminist scholarship sort of took this idea of Shaddai because Shaddayim in Hebrew is breasts. And so the idea could be sort of a feminist interpretation or understanding of God, sort of a mother God sort of figure that might have been part of the history all those years ago and is eventually phased out. We dropped the Shaddai and just got El, just got God, right? And so instead of having sort of this mother God figure, it turned masculine pretty quickly. That's probably not even correct as it goes, because there was probably just a place named Shaddai. And so he was the God of Shaddai. And the God of Shaddai becomes the God of Israel as time goes on. So it's like different places had the different deities that they worshiped. We see this in Greek religion as well, that in different Greek cities, depending on where you were, you had a god of the city. You had Zeus being the big god, so to speak, the top dog. But you'd have some cities where it would be a city of Apollo, or a city of Dionysus, or a city of Hermes, maybe. I don't know if Hermes got that high up in the rankings, but you would have different gods that would have more control over a city. So in the same way, El Shaddai might have been a local regional deity name that gets transformed through the years. So a little biblical history and a little language for us all. Walk in my ways and be blameless. So again, idea of Abraham being loyal, Abraham having faith, Abraham being observant, and then we get this covenant. We've heard the story before, exceedingly numerous. And then Abraham is overcome with emotion. And finally, we get the name change. Don't have to stumble through Avram anymore, or Abram. We finally get to Abraham. Abraham meaning Av of Rav, Avraham, the idea of a great nation, the father of many. So Av and then Araham, the idea of being a father of many people. And of course, as we mentioned and made a little joke, we have the fertility. And the kings are going to come later, a couple thousand years later. Okay. Let's keep it going. Bob, you there? Bob asleep. Hey, Bob. Can you unmute? You want to read a little bit? Can't hear you, Bob. You got to unmute. You have to unmute your computer, Bob. I can't hear you. You have to unmute. There you go.
No.
Try it again.
There you go.
I will maintain my covenant between me and you and your offspring to come as an everlasting covenant to be God to you and to your offspring to come. I send you sojourn into you and your offspring to come. all the land Canaan as an everlasting holding. I'll be their God.
Yes, we have the eternal promise here, right? That it's not about Abraham, it's about the generations to come. A lot of promises. Yeah, there's a lot of promising going on here, to be sure. And speaking of, give us a little more promising, Bob. God further said. Bob, you keep going.
And you keep, God further said to Abraham, as for you and your offspring to come throughout the ages shall keep my covenant. So shall the covenant between me and your offspring to follow, which you shall keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You shall circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and you shall be the sign of a covenant between me and you. And throughout the 8 days, who is not your offspring, they must be circumcised, homeborn and purchased alike. Thus shall my covenant be marked in your flesh as an everlasting fact, that if any, you have to raise it, any male who is uncircumcised fails to circumcise the flesh of his foreskin, that person shall be cut off from his skin and has broken my covenant.
Okay. Abraham finally gets the fine print because that wasn't brought up yet. And so it's all this promising, oh, by the way, we got circumcision for you. And that's got to be for everybody. 8 days old, right? So we have that biblically, right? 8 days old. We have circumcision. Of course, Abraham's a little bit older than 8 days old right now. And every male among us must be circumcised. And that is the sign of the covenant. And so God says to Abraham, as for your wife Sarai, you're not going to call her Sarai anymore, but she's going to be Sarah. I'll bless her also. I will give you a son, by her. I will bless her so that she will give rise to nations. Rulers of peoples shall issue from her. Abraham threw himself on his face and laughed and said to himself, can a child be born to a man 100 years old, or can Sarah bear at 90? And Abraham said to God, oh, that Ishmael may live by your favor. So he's saying, yeah, maybe let's not put all of our eggs in the Sarah basket at this point. Maybe it's not going to be a thing that happens. So let's have Ishmael be the one, that's going to be the descendant. It's going to live and be the one who's going to be the inheritor of this covenant. God says, no, slow your roll. Sarah's going to bear you a son, and you'll name him Isaac, and maintain my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his offspring to come. And for Ishmael, sure, I'll listen to you on Ishmael. I'm going to bless him. I'm going to make Ishmael fertile, exceedingly numerous. He shall be the father of 12 chieftains, and I'll make of him a great nation. But my covenant I will maintain with Isaac, whom Sarah shall bear to you at this season next year. And as God is done speaking to him, God takes a left turn, sort of heads off and goes on God's merry way and is gone from Abraham. So that's a lot of information in this chapter, right? A lot's going on here. We get the affirmation of the covenant. We get the understanding that it is going to be Isaac, who just gets a name in this thing, but Isaac is going to be the child who's going to inherit and be the one to carry on the covenant. But Ishmael is also going to have some fun too. He gets to also, have and be a great nation as well. But again, for every you don't get something for nothing, so to speak. And so now it's time to introduce circumcision to the conversation. Make sense?
Rabbi,
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
I'm amazed at these ages. Was a year back then the same as our year now?
So, it's a great question. When you see the ages like this, I wouldn't try to rationalize it by trying to sort of see if their year is different than our year. It's probably not the case. I think what they're trying to convey here is the miraculous nature of the event, more than anything else. So there's nothing too hard for God to figure out. I think what they were trying to say here is that they were really old and they had kids. Were they actually 99 and 90 and whatever it is? Probably not. We could probably guess assuredly not. They were not that old. I don't think lifespans were going to be that high, to be sure, right? So I think what they're just trying to convey is that these people were really old and what a miracle it's going to be. Even more reason for the schnapps, that such a miracle could happen. I think that's what they're trying to do. Okay, we got a question from Sandy about Ishmael being circumcised. Oh, it's coming up in just a few paragraphs. We're going to get to poor Ishmael as well to deal with his situation, so to speak. So we're going to get to there. Yeah, I mean, this is obviously the foundation or the what's the word I'm looking for? This is where you get the religious obligation towards circumcision, right here in Genesis. And circumcision has lasted until today, though I would be remiss if I did not mention that more and more Jewish mothers are not circumcising their kids or their boys, because they feel like it's an antiquated sort of tradition. And it's something that is not, they don't see as beneficial at this point. Yeah, see here, Leah's also mentioning, why circumcision, and why not an ear? There are a few ways of answering that one, but I think certainly it is about the idea of descendants and about, it's symbolic. We're going to see a little bit later that Abraham, when he makes a promise with his servant, when the servant makes the promise, Abraham says, "Put your hand under my thigh." And that was sort of where the oath was taken in that area. And so I believe it has something to do with the fact that we're talking about reproduction, we're talking about the future, and that's where it has to be as opposed to the ear. Anyone can pierce an ear, so to speak. Real dedication is going to be what we're going to see in a moment. But I do think it has to do more with symbolic about the idea of the descendants being as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sands, the dust of the earth, that there's a metaphor there, perhaps, that is part of this conversation. But it is a good question that perhaps, Jewish baby boys would be asking themselves, hey, wait a minute. Maybe just pierce my ear. Put that knife down. But
Is it Jewish law?
it is a law. That's what I'm saying. Like this is law. This is high on the list, so to speak, because as it said in the text, right, that if you're not you don't have the covenant. You're not entering into it. So you're marking your flesh, in such a way to show that you are part of the people. It's about identity. That's another part of it too. I mean, today, in 21st century America, though again, maybe a little less than it used to be, circumcision became a pretty common rite, just generally speaking. You don't have to be Jewish to be circumcised. The Islamic faith, they circumcise. And we have a comment here. Hold on, I can't see it because of the thing. Okay. So I'm gonna touch on that point in a moment. We can finish the circumcision point. But the idea being that this was part of of what it meant to be Jewish and entered into the covenant. Now, Leo was asking about women sort of being ignored here. And I mean, sort of, it's 4,000 years ago. I mean, I think that, that would probably not, they weren't really thinking about women's rights and identity, but in defense of Judaism on that front, I think more than any other group at that period of time, they thought about women's rights and how to, give women a more elevated status than their contemporaries. Not at all saying that there was equality. Again, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying that the status of women in the Bible, I think, is certainly better than the status of women in other documents of that same time period. And then as we find out later in rabbinic Judaism is going to be passed through the mother. It's going to be maternal, right? We have a maternalistic sort of a view of how Judaism is passed down. The father's religion doesn't matter. It's the mother's religion. If the mom is Jewish, then the child is Jewish. And so, for better or for worse, by the way, but that was the determination. because you always know, so to speak, who the mother is. You don't always know who the father is. So it's the mother's religion that would determine the child's religion.
And other countries like China and all over, do they circumcise their children?
I don't think it's as common, no. Because the Europeans don't circumcise, either. No.
Well, when my grandson was born, his father's Australian.
Yeah.
And he's Catholic, and he did not want Zachy circumcised. And I said, to me, it's the first law, but it's your child. But they talked to Rabbi Treiser, and he said, here, most boys are circumcised, and he might feel funny if he's not. So they.
When he gets older.
Yeah.
When it's older. And plus, if there's the argument of, well, let them make their own choice when they're older. I got to tell you, it's not a good time, for that kind of thing. 8 days old. I mean, like I once did, I didn't do the circumcision. I was present at a circumcision of an older child. They called me in for it because, and this is also part of this too. No. It was actually the exact situation you had mentioned in it, but a little differently. They had adopted a boy from China, and he was not circumcised, and he was X number of years old already. And you cannot get, more often than not, you cannot get a doctor to perform a circumcision for no reason, unless it's a baby. He had another problem in the region, and so while they were fixing that problem, they threw it on for free, sort of like, a little extra, while we're down there, let's give them a little trim, so to speak. So I was there for that. And I got into the ER, I got all scrubbed up, and I said a blessing or two, and then I got a Dodge. So I wasn't staying there to watch the festivities, but I was just there to say the blessing or two, because it is a more involved procedure. And when you're an older person, how much the more so, to the point where urologists are not going to do an elective circumcision. Unless they're Jewish and really, really religious, yes, but accommodating it sort of in a way, because they have to find a medical reason to do it, or else it's going to cost you.
That were converting, men that were converting, that were conservative or Orthodox, and that was part of the conversion.
Yeah.
They had to be circumcised.
Yeah, 100%. The Reform movement does not say you have to be circumcised in that moment. They prefer it. I'm not going to tell you no. I mean, that's still part of the tradition. But you will have Reform rabbis that will just do the drop of blood instead. That they get a needle and a gauze pad and are meant to do their thing. Once again, by the way, no one's sitting there watching them. They can prick their finger for all I know, and whatever it is. But I'm not checking. But that being said,
why was that dropped?
Which?
That no circumcision necessary.
Oh no, I would say that some of the Reform rabbis thought it was going to be unrealistic expectation to have a man in their 50s, 40s, whatever it might be, undergo a surgical procedure that is especially, again, hard to do. Even to get it done with a doctor at that age, unless you find the right doctor, and the recovery time being onerous. One could say it might be a way to dissuade people affiliating with Judaism, if they have to circumcise at an older age. And so they use a different idea about the drop of blood, which is used in other circumstances, because if you are already circumcised as a male, and you're converting to Judaism, right? You can't be re-circumcised. Well, actually, technically you can, but it's a whole different procedure. But, well,
And we're glad we're women.
yeah, we'll save that story for Hanukkah. But since more often that you can't get re-circumcised, you would do the drop of blood instead to show that you were committed. Commitment is very important. It's not, But yeah, I mean, it is certainly something. If you looked on if you just typed in like circumcision and whatever it is, you're going to see a whole lot more articles. So just one actually recently on Kveller or My Jewish Learning, one of the other blogs about it. It was a hard article to read. I mean, to be honest, because it was very obviously anti-circumcision. and the idea of people being intactivists, where they want the bodily autonomy for the child too, which is, by the way, not a completely unfair argument, right? So it's certainly a debate, but as part of Jewish tradition and Jewish law, this is part of it, right? And so, it's about faith, but connection, and again, like, to me, it's an important Jewish value. Like, I didn't think twice about it for my three sons. I didn't think about it, as a question. Neither did Elizabeth. Not that we were so keen, on sitting there, watching the festivities once again, but you do it. They say it's one of the hardest days of a mother's life when they have a son. Is that moment? It is not an easy day.
I was glad that Rabbi Treiser talked them into it, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does matter, as a complete side note, but it is part of the conversation. And you sort of mentioned it with Rabbi Treiser. To me, it was always less about feeling funny, but more that, let's say you're, going steady with a gal in college as Jewish, and it proceeds to a physical encounter. And if the Jewish guy at that point is not circ, it's going to be an issue. And then certainly, it might be an uncomfortable conversation in more ways than one about what's going on here, especially if you are dating a conservative or Orthodox, person, and it has progressed to that point in the relationship. One can see how it might not progress much further. And so, by not circumcising, you're actually making a different choice for your kid in terms of their relationships as a Jew. Okay, we got only a few minutes left, but so let's finish on a bloody note here. This is going to answer Sandy's question. Abraham took his son Ishmael and all his homeborn slaves and all those he had bought, every male in his household, and circumcised the flesh of their foreskins on that very day, as God had spoken to them. Abraham was 99 when he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. No Anastasia. Anastasia was a princess. Anastasia is a medicine. And his son Ishmael was 13. Happy bar mitzvah when he was circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin. Reading a Torah portion is not so bad now. It could be worse. Then Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on the same day. All of his household, everyone is circumcised. So again, commitment. There's a great story, and if I tell it again next week, you'll have to stop me. But there's a great story about a debate between Isaac and Ishmael, when they are both sort of a little bit older, and Ishmael saying, I am so great. I am so much better than you, Isaac, because I was 13 when I was circumcised. I had to experience all that pain and discomfort. And you, Isaac, were just 8 days old when you got circumcised. You don't remember anything about the whole experience. My sacrifice was greater than yours. And then Isaac, according to this story, says, well, I didn't have a choice, when I got circumcised, but if it were up to me, I would sacrifice anything. I'd give all of myself to God. And at that moment, you get the story of the Akedah, right? When Isaac is almost sacrificed on Mount Moriah, right? And so this idea of when they're circumcised becomes a little bit of a competition between the stepbrothers. Are they stepbrothers? Was that the right term for that? Yeah.
Brothers.
Half brothers, yeah. Half brothers.
But actually, Ishmael wasn't Jewish in the law because his mother wasn't.
Remember, these laws come later. Right now, no one's Jewish. Right now, they're all Israelites and slaves. Barely even Israelites. Actually, Hebrews probably more than anything else at this point. But you're right, as in, like, this stuff comes into play later, right? And again, spoiler alert, but I'm sure everyone knows at this point, Ishmael is going to be seen as the father of the Islamic tradition, right? And so Abraham gives birth to both traditions, that Isaac is going to be the ancestor of the Jewish people, and Ishmael is going to be the ancestor or the Muslims. And so in the Quran, you know, Ishmael gets more of the he gets more of an uplift in the Quran, and Isaac takes a sort of a secondary seat. In the Torah, it's flipped, you know, that Isaac is the one obviously who is the patriarch, and Ishmael exits stage left in another few chapters, and it's not part of the story in the same way. Tradition.
Great class, Rabbi.
Tradition. Yes.
She didn't know any of this.
Yeah.
I
See?
know about Abraham. I didn't know about Ishmael.
Yeah.
Ishmael. Yeah. No. It's again. That's like to say family dynamics and some R-rated activities play a big role in Genesis, obviously, and there's a lot of twists and turns and some more good ones next week.
Oh,
As I
really?
said, it is Genesis.
I should come back.
You should come back
With your
because
glasses on.
Eyeglasses.
I could basically, you know, every week is another scandal, and that's Genesis. And so it is good to be with everyone again, obviously. But we're gonna be finishing up our Bible class and transitioning into our next class, our Adult B'nai Mitzvah. And so everyone who is staying for that can stay, and everyone else have a great night. Erev Tov. Big week next week for more Genesis. Don't miss it.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Good night,
Thank you.
everybody.
Night.
Right.